Good afternoon, and welcome to a Citrus Bites budget special from our offices in Sevenoaks. So, after months and months of has felt like a really chaotic build up to today's budget, not helped actually with the Office of Budget Responsibility leak of the actual report of their forecast that take all the budget announcements into account, which came out 45 minutes before the budget. First time ever that's happened in a major, they called it a technical error. We finally know what Rachel Reeves is doing as Chancellor this time round. Going to wind you back just 12 months very quickly. Those of you may remember some of the words that came out. Not going to be coming back for more borrowing or more taxes. And we won't have to do a budget like this ever again. So those were the promises made in 2024. I'll let you decide whether those are being honoured. This has felt, though, I think one of the best analogies I've heard was this has felt like you're going for some injections. You know it's going to hurt. You just don't know how much it's going to hurt by. And this build up has felt like exactly that. The rhetoric has become more about there's Brexit's been talked about again. Again, we've lived the impact of the pandemic, the blame on the previous government. So lots of people getting the blame for the fact that in spite of all the efforts made 12 months ago in the budget, here we are where things are still really tricky. And when I say things are still really tricky, I guess one of the really big ticket issues that has been widely publicised going into today is the actual budget deficit that the UK is facing. So we're sat on a 2.6 trillion budget deficit. Well, if any of us had an overdraft like that have been going up and up and up and up and up for year after year for so many years, it's not unreasonable to expect the fact that the people we owe the money to would A, want it back, but B, they'd kind of start charging us more money if we wanted to borrow more. So to lend us the money, they'd be saying, well, actually, I think you're a higher risk. I need to charge you more. And this is what the government's facing. So tackling this huge ballooning debt that the UK has is really, really important. And that's been one of the big things that's been factored into the announcements today. So when you look at last year, I think it was forecasted the tax increases last year came to 40 billion. They've been followed up today with what's forecast to be another 26 billion in tax increases. However, when we get to year 29-30, one of the announcements that came out last year was the government spending for the UK budget would be going into surplus, but that surplus was really small. It was like a 9 billion surplus, which is a lot unless you're dealing with the whole of the UK economy, at which point trying to land on a 9 billion surplus in kind of 4 years' time is really tricky. With the output of today's announcements, that budget surplus should go to 22 billion. And the reason this is important is obviously this is how much it's costing the government to borrow this money. And right now, one in every £10 of what the government is spending is simply going to pay the interest on the money that's owed. One in every £10. So if you think of all the things the governments want to do to invest and to spend more, 10% of that money is gone before they even start, just servicing the interest. So keeping those servicing costs down and getting them down lower by getting the money it costs them to borrow the money is really, really important. So let's start with kind of the really big tax announcements that the government made today. The first thing is the tax threshold. So this is what we call fiscal drag. More and more people being dragged into the tax thresholds which haven't moved in line with inflation or pay rises. They've just been frozen. Started with the Conservatives. So Rachel Reeves today announced that they will be extended. These freezes would be extended for a further 3 years. So once you go beyond 2028, we've got the further 3 years of tax thresholds being frozen. Just to give you a bit of context there, it's forecast that an extra 780,000 people alone will now be scooped into paying basic rate tax by year 29-30. 780,000 extra people paying that basic rate tax. So we're going to have, including people taking a step pension, will now be scooped into the basic rate tax arena. That's the first thing. Second thing, cash ISAs. This has been widely talked about over the kind of recent weeks. So cash ISAs from the 6th of April 2027. Right now it's £20,000 maximum to a cash ISA. Actually, that will reduce to 12,000 from April 2027. There's still a £20,000 individual limit, but the extra 8,000 will go into stocks and shares ISA. However, if you're over 65, that doesn't apply. So over 65, from the announcements today, will still have that maximum 20,000 available should they choose to. You invest that into a cash, place that into a cash ISA. One of the next biggest tax grabs, actually, which actually has come out with a much higher forecast than I think that was originally predicted, is salary sacrifice on pension schemes. Now, actually, to some people, this may be something they've never heard of. There are a lot of private sector pensions that operate on a salary sacrifice basis, quite often used by people either to put more of their salary across, which is kind of in a tax efficient way, or indeed bonuses sometimes. So the government have placed a cap on the amount that people will be able to place into their pension via salary sacrifice to £2,000. And this is a really interesting one. It doesn't come in actually for a few years. So I think we're looking at 2029, but it's likely to raise an extra, or 2028, 2029, but we'd like to raise an extra £4 billion in tax. And that's the scale of the impact this is going to have on employers now working out what do we need to do. There's an impact potential in people's pensions. How do they mitigate that? Do they still try and do something themselves? Do they need to do something with pay rises? This is going to be a really tricky one for employers now to work out whether they just pass that straight on to employers, or whether they try and intervene to support employees with this change. But salary sacrifice pensions are a really big one. Another one that's been widely talked about, a mansion tax. So also, and I think it's called the higher value council tax. So revaluation of properties in band F, G, and H. No idea how that's going to work. And then additional payments. So if your property comes out as being valued as more than 2 million, that will be an extra payment you need to make of £2,500 alongside your council tax. If your property is worth more than 5 million, that will be an extra £7,500 that will need to be paid alongside your council tax. So again, a change coming in there. That's from 2028. So again, kind of some of these are back-ended, which is one of the sort of very common themes about some of the announcements today. A lot of them are back-ended. Just, says is there enough stability? Is there wiggle room in this? Are we going to see a number of these implemented? Or actually just some of them are so complicated to implement, it needs that amount of time for the legislation to be worked through carefully about how to do it. So the taxing assets. So the government has made it clear, that whole we don't want to increase taxes for working people, we're not going to increase kind of VAT, income tax. So they're looking at what might be described as unearned income or taxing of assets, as opposed to taxing of income. So there's increases there for dividend, property, and savings income. So there's tax increases to that. Fuel duty, there's a bit of breathing space on fuel duty, was due to be, I think there's a 5p tax due to be increased. That's been frozen at the moment, has been for the last 12 months. I think that's going to be frozen again until September 26, and no increase to fuel duty at this time. But obviously that's not long, it's less than a year away. So that'll be coming back round to find out what happens with that. There's a new excise duty on electric vehicles. So remember, when these came out, it was very much a case of encouraging use of electric vehicles, better for the climate. However, of course, electric vehicles are still using the roads. And I think that, this is something that's come out to say, well, look, road repairs and road maintenance is still very valid. Electric vehicles are still using those, so we need to be collecting money on that. One of the really big things, though, is I have no idea yet how this is actually going to be collected. I think there's a view that it might be self-administered, like you need to disclose how many miles you're doing because it's actually calculated on the number of miles. So if you've got an electric vehicle, I think it's 3p per mile. If you've got a plug-in hybrid, I think it's 1.5p per mile. Lots, I think, still to come out over that. I'm sure everyone's really good at self-administering a tax that they have to pay on their electric vehicle. But in theory, who checks it? Don't know how it works. And so plenty more to follow. Sugary drinks, so tax announced. I think a lot of people saw that actually got announced 24 hours before the budget. Sugary drinks and milky drinks, so things like lattes. Obviously, sugar drinks tax has already come in. It came in through, I think it's been a few years through previous government. This government's gone further, so they've actually reduced even further the amount of sugar that's allowed to be in these sugary drinks. Again, all with a view of trying to create a healthy environment, reduce the pressure on the NHS. Gambling tax, so big change to gambling tax, quite a big increase in gambling tax. Won't go into the details now, but that certainly had an increase today. And I guess one of the other bits that actually has been spared from tax, that they made a point of saying, is so all payments, all people receiving blood scandal payments, those payments will now be free of IHT both spousal children as well. So that money will be excluded from IHT. So there's a kind of really big initial overview of the tax part. Just have a look at the spending parts. Obviously, it talks about the government and the need to raise money to service the debt. They obviously are raising more money than that because they need to increase some spendings. They want to invest, as governments always do. How can we invest? How can we help the economy grow? Well, the first part of the spending is they're actually removing the two-child benefit cap. So this is something that at the moment, again, has been widely covered by the media. Currently, there is a two-child benefit cap. Can't claim benefits on more than two children in a family. Now that actually figure, my understanding at the moment is that becomes unlimited. It's a cost, predicted a cost to £3 billion to do this. And when you add that, I think, to the welfare changes where the U-turn was made by the Labour government in the June or July, you may remember this year, came under immense pressure from their own backbenchers over the welfare changes they want to implement. So they did a U-turn on it. That already had a cost of about £4.5 billion that needs to be funding. So those welfare changes alone, we're talking £7-8 billion in those welfare changes. There's more money for the NHS for some technology. There's more money for secondary schools, things like libraries, obviously putting more money into schools. There's training, so there's extra support for small and medium enterprises to encourage them with apprenticeships and what they can do in terms of training for apprentices. There's a commitment to bring energy bills down. So reducing energy bills, ideally the average energy bill by about £150, I think, from next year. So there's spending going on there. There's also increases to both the minimum wage and the living wage. So this, from a Labour's perspective, is saying, look, we want to encourage people into work. We understand what we're doing with the benefits piece, but actually we want to make work more appealing, and making it more appealing by increasing the minimum wage and the living wage. I think one of the big debates that will happen on the back of that is, well, does that really happen? Or are we going to find now that employers are saying it just becomes unaffordable to keep building employment because of the minimum wages they need to be paying? Is that right? Is that wrong? Again, you'll have your own opinion, just reporting as we see what came out through the budget. And the other one is the basic and new state pension. So, the government have honoured the triple lock, and this is a big cost. So there's a 4% increase coming for the triple lock. So, this is where the money's going. There's a lot needed, lots more small details. And again, some of these, there's small taxes that have come out. So there'll be lots to follow still on the actual detail, just giving you the real headlines today. So all of that, what's it done? What's it actually done in terms of the Office of Budget Responsibility? They're forecasting, they've looked at all the numbers, they've pored over the numbers, they've then released their outputs, as I say, early, leaked them before the budget. It's kind of hard to get excited about these, really, and I'm sure that's unfair. But I know that the government is saying, isn't it great, because the OBR have upped the growth forecast for the UK from this year from 1 to 1.5%. And I find it quite hard to get overexcited about that, 1 to 1.5%. Clearly, it is a positive message. It could have gone backwards, but these are really small numbers in terms of the growth of the economy. And then actually, for the next few years, the OBR is saying the economy won't grow as much as previously predicted. So that's not a great position. So despite the investment, the growth predictions now aren't as good. Inflation. So inflation is, food inflation is a big problem. Overall inflation is a big problem. I talk about inflation on Citrus Bites all the time. And inflation prediction at the moment is 3.5, coming down to 2.5 next year. And then I think 2027 to hit the 2% Bank of England goal for inflation. So that's the inflation bit. I think, worth noting, I talked about employment before. Is this plan working? Are we seeing employers, bearing in mind they took a big hit to national insurance contributions already for employees, are all of these bits of package that are being pieced together, are they really helping get people into work? And of course, the challenge at the moment is the simple answer is no, because unemployment has gone up every single month. And again, by all means, go and watch the Citrus Bites should you want to. But I talk about this a lot. Unemployment is continuing to go up. So if the goal is, to have people working, to encourage people back to work if they're not in the workplace at the moment, these numbers are not currently going up. Anyway, you'll decide. I present the information, you'll decide how you feel, you'll decide what's good and what you don't agree with. I'll come back again in a few weeks' time and talk about Citrus Bites. We'll be communicating much more information to you over kind of the actual detail. But that's it for today. And I hope it's been useful in some way. I'm sure there's plenty of other information that you can read as well. But that's it. Hope you enjoyed it. Take care and bye for now.